I would like to stop there and kind of throw out this just general question. What other institutional barriers do you anticipate coming up at your institutions? I'd be curious to know, and I'm assuming there's probably some that you have in mind. So I'll open it up for questions and discussion now on these potential barriers, and hopefully we can give you some ideas on how to get around those if there are some out there that you anticipate.
And Ron, I think we have one hand up.
Ken Anderson.
One of the institutional barriers that I know people can encounter is just the lack of the ability of the institution to respond nimbly. So you have a great idea, you want to make change, and the procedures you have to follow slow you down by semesters sometimes. So what do you do in terms of the slow rate of change that an institution has through its normal procedures?
Ooh,
I can give one example. As an associate dean, I advocated for the creation of a course repetition policy or grade forgiveness policy. Basically, a student gets a bad grade in one course, they can take a new course and have the second grade replace the first grade. That took 2.5 years of work to get that, from getting people on board to getting the policy created to getting it approved and actually implemented.
Thanks for starting us off with an easy one, Ken. That sounds like, those are challenges that we've probably all seen at the universities, right? And some move faster than others, but most of them probably move pretty slow overall. Yeah, so what can we do in those cases? I guess, obviously you can propose things that you want to do, right? You're going to run into these challenges. I believe NSF will understand these, and that's one of the reasons why we probably will want to change or update our BPC plans on a fairly regular basis to say, look, we wanted to do this, we ran into this problem at our university, some of these there might be just no way around besides waiting for it to get through the process. So I am of the belief that NSF will be understanding of those kinds of things, and as long as we're updating our BPC plans to reflect some of these challenges we've run into, that should be okay. Anybody else have anything to add to that?
And I think it's worth it for some of those long things, because those long things tend to be things that we can institutionalize. And I think this relates to the point Tracy made yesterday of like, we want to not have to be doing these things. And sexism and racism actually aren't going to go away. But there are some things that we can do where we can institutionalize things. We can say, we're changing this policy for the better. And 2.5 years later, when we finally get this policy through, we're going to be thinking about that policy a lot less and able to focus on equity within our departments and inclusion within our departments and really things that can have more impact. Manuel has during the CRA presentation, had a comment about how this is like dieting. Manuel, are you up for it?
Yeah, just to add to my own answer, I find that just engaging people in the conversation and getting multiple levels of the university involved in the conversation is a reward of itself, right? People might recognize that it's slow, but at least you've got people talking.
The dieting analogy is kind of silly. I mean, if you're on a diet because you want to get to some point in a weight, right? I want to be 120 pounds for me. You watch what you eat, you exercise, you eat more vegetables, and when you hit 120, you don't say, okay, I'm there. Now we can go back and eat all the junk I was eating. You got to keep some of those habits. So this is not reaching a goal, this is changing the process, and that's a process that will continue forever. I'll add one more that I hadn't mentioned before. I was at a grad school meeting several years back, and a recruiter from Purdue gave a really interesting answer. They asked, what will you be doing? This is a group of diversity officers. What would you be doing in 10 years? And he said, I'll be recruiting white people. And there was a hush and a silence. And he said, they will be underrepresented. That means the effort of bringing the ones that are not here now has worked. And I got to bring in the other ones. The whole point is that you are always going to have a group that is underrepresented. and you always want to try to bring them in. And it was kind of a weird, sort of uncomfortable answer, but it got the point across.
Awesome. Other questions? Other barriers?
We have a few in the chat. Lucia talked about sustainability and how to get people engaged in the long term, and Sarah talked about workloads and lack of people.
Yeah, so maybe we can look at the sustainability one first. I mean, I think that's the reason you want to have the plan in place, right? Because the plan lays out a long-term goal, right? There's several long-term goals, and so I'm hoping that, you know, something like this plan is what can really motivate people to stay on and collecting data, right? And seeing whether you're making progress or not. If you're not making progress, then I think it becomes very clear to your department that some changes need to be made. If you are making progress, hopefully people get very excited about that progress and want to make more progress. And again, updating, you know, the plan on a somewhat regular basis, I would hope will lead to long-term sustainability of these efforts, right? And I really think that seeing those wins, seeing changes, you know, small tweaks to the curriculum or to culture, and how that affects the students and the department will lead to people really buying in and getting excited about these things. I don't know. Anybody else have anything to add to that one?
I'll just add that this is a long game. Don't burn out everybody that's willing to work in the first year, right?
Ooh, another great point. Yeah, and yeah, don't you know, you don't want to draw on the same people. We've all heard of the term probably, you know, the black tax. If you've got one black faculty member, you do not want to be asking that person to do all the work, right? And so again, I think this is one of those times where we are right now, where there are more people willing to participate in these activities than previously. I'm certainly seeing that at my university, and I would suspect many of us are seeing that. And it's very often just comes down to people didn't quite know what to do before, but at least now they're willing to ask, what can I do and what should I be doing? And I'm hearing that question a lot. And I think, you know, getting some momentum and keeping people involved would be important. But yes, we don't want to burn out anyone, especially our faculty from underrepresented groups.
I think it's really important too to think about, like, as a white faculty member in these spaces, I try and think about, like, say Ron and I were working together. Ron shouldn't do the data collection. I should do the data collection. Do you know what I mean? Like, Ron's identities are not helpful, doesn't make him more impactful doing data collection. Ron's identities make him more impactful when he leads events in the department and when he's visible to our students and in our recruiting efforts. And so making sure there are ways in which our faculty colleagues of color are really impactful towards BPC work, and they get asked to do that and all of the logistical work. And I feel like as a white person in my institution, it's my responsibility to do all the behind the scenes anti-racist logistical work so that that's not falling on my colleagues of color who are disproportionately burdened with BPC work and then don't receive credit for doing BPC work.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, you know, like my spheres of influence, I think that's the term we used yesterday, are very different, right? I mean, you know, by mentoring students and doing research with students from underrepresented groups, I may be able to have a very different impact than someone else, just because seeing someone like them doing that work goes a long way. So great, thanks, Colleen. I haven't been keeping up with the chat, but it looks like there are some other questions.
I'd like to make a comment too, just coming back to what you were talking about earlier. Another sustainability thing that can happen is that there are rewards for doing BPC work. You know, like it factors into your annual review, for example. And that's a way to make it sustainable, because people are gonna prune off the parts of their workload that don't affect, you know, that don't hurt their career, don't, you know, cause problems for other people. And so they may prune it off so that's the other thing. And that's something the department chairs have a role in instituting as well. I mean, you've already said it, but I think you didn't say it in the context of sustainability, and I think that's a key piece.
No, I agree. I think that's great to bring that back up. It's sustainable if it's incentivized in a really concrete way. So yeah, hopefully more chairs will do those kinds of things.
And I consider linking the chat to an explanation of cultural taxation. So some of the dynamics that we were just talking about the extent to which faculty members of color are asked to serve on every diversity committee, so that we can have the Black perspective, assuming that people can speak for a whole group of people. So I think that's a helpful article. And we're revamping resources for faculty retention, and so that one will be on BPC Net within a week or so.
Yeah, the other piece of that also is to maybe let somebody get out of other stuff. I guess this is implicit in what Colleen was saying, but if you're going to be the face of all Black computer scientists, then that takes time, and you don't have time to do some other really unpleasant service role for or time consuming, honest. Of course, we love our service to our department, but time consuming role. And that's something that I think I finally got that across in my own institution, because it is good to have, an event for women. It is good to have women faculty there, of course, but then you have to recognize that maybe they shouldn't have to do something else.
And I want to kind of piggyback on that. It's, this taxation issue, it's interesting from both sides, because as the only tenured Black faculty member in my college, I feel the need to be on a lot of committees. Like, I don't want decisions to be made without me being in that room very often, right? But I can't be on all of them. And so, it's you don't want to ask that person to be on all those committees, but realize also that that person is also struggling with wanting to be on all those committees, and not wanting to be on those committees, but wanting to be part of the decision making, because you don't want to see a decision made that's going to affect your students of color in a negative way just because someone didn't think about it, right? And so thinking about ways to get that perspective without that person having to be on the committees, I think is certainly something everyone should consider, right? So maybe decisions are made and then socialized with your women faculty or your faculty from underrepresented groups to try and understand, is this a good thing? Did we overlook anything here? So just something to add to that conversation.
Ron, can I add something to that? I think also a lot of times, a lot of these service appointments are not part of the main agenda. So you have curriculum, you have personnel, and then 3 weeks later, diversity, we forgot about that one. And the problem is that then, while it makes sense that maybe Ron should be in that committee, we already put him on 3 committees. And then all of a sudden, that's where the overtaxation comes in. And the other side of that is he's here talking to you. This is a sort of a service committee, right? I mean, it's not just in the department, but the profession, the numbers, look at the Toby, the numbers of tenured Black and Latino professors in the US, it's ridiculously low. So we don't even have enough to have a party in each state. So, and I'm not exaggerating. So we get pulled into a lot of these things, and the departments sometimes go like, well, but you do too much for the profession. You should say no to some of them. If I say no to some of them, this would look very, very different. There will be no diversity in diversity committees. That's not right. So we have to be cognizant of that work.
Yeah, has to be recognized. I've noticed a few comments about the current COVID environment and maybe losing faculty who retire early, and not being able to give raises in these environments, right? I'm sure lots of universities are potentially going to furloughs, certainly not giving raises. So how do you incentivize, right? So it certainly makes some of those carrots a little less effective than I had hoped. Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that one. It's certainly a challenging time, right? And I guess we just part of what we have to do is hope that in the current environment, socially, that other factors are going to help incentivize people. But yeah, I agree.
I think there are some ways you can incentivize people that don't have to do with raises. Yeah. So agree raises might be an issue in the near future, but if you can give the faculty member a reduction on some other workload, or you could give them another TA for their course to help with their course, or maybe buy them a new computer or iPad if that's something they need. The point being is that the merit raises are certainly one carrot, but I find there's many carrots.
Spoken like a true department chair. Awesome.
I don't want to lose a comment that was made some time ago. Sarah asked about a reduction in the number of faculty in their department for various reasons and an increased workload with COVID, with an implication about what if you don't have the power to do it right now?
So it don't take very much time, right? So that, like BPC training or microaggression training, or something very specific, training your TAs, those things don't really take a lot of time, but might make a difference. And those would be perfectly reasonable.
And you propose activities that are appropriate for what you have in your department right now. And again, if that changes, then you revise, 6 months down the road, revise your plan. And again, I think in this climate, NSF will understand if you've lost several faculty who were participating in certain activities, that's going to affect the work, just like it would affect, a research project. So the importance of, refining your plan and reporting on a yearly basis. When you do your reports for your grants, reporting how things have been affected on the BPC side are also important.
There's a variety of questions sort of around people who want to be engaged but don't know how to do so properly.
I think I've heard this one as well, and I believe Colleen might have something to say about this one. But yeah, people who want to be engaged have the right intentions, but just aren't very good at engaging in certain ways, right? Maybe not being that public person who's engaging with students from underrepresented groups, for example. I think in those cases, the best thing is to try and get those people into activities that are appropriate for their skill set and their spheres of influence. Maybe they're not really good at engaging with particular groups, but they're really good with data. There's your data chair, right? That's the person you want on that. So it probably will in some cases require some finessing from whoever's putting together the plan to try and make sure that the right people end up in the right places in that plan. Anybody have anything to add to that?
The check sheet that you mentioned from Barbara Ryder is a good example, because there's some really, really, really low-key activities there, like going to a lunch with the female students in engineering in the female dorm. You sit there and say, how are your classes going? And you eat, and that's it. And so you can sort of slowly build into more advocacy roles and more bigger roles where you have to actually speak about these issues, which is a little harder. So having that list of activities, from low end to, chairing a national conference, it's important.
Did she categorize those, by the way, Manuel? Do you know if they were kind of organized, or if you just had to kind of look at them?
I think they're in some, order from, an hour at a workshop to, running a national committee. Yeah.
And I believe we have a copy of that we can make available to everybody participating in the workshop.
I'll also comment, sometimes you need to tell people they're doing it wrong. We have found that works better if the person telling them they're doing something wrong to some particular group isn't from the targeted group.
Yes.
So if you want to tell somebody they're saying something offensive to women, it usually comes better if it's somebody that's a man talking to the man that's doing something offensive to women, because it doesn't become a back and forth defensive kind of argument.
Great point.
And I think helping, the first cultural competence I would want people to understand is the difference between intention and impact, because I think it makes sense for us to give our colleagues the benefit of the doubt that they have positive intent, and they certainly know that when they have positive intent, but helping them recognize that we might not always have positive impact. And that helps us think about the language that we use and the teaching practices that we use and our departmental policies. I think it's really easy for us to hear about structural racism or institutionalized racism and assume that that requires intent. But there can be policies that are put in place that have a differential negative impact on people of color. And so are institutionalized racism, but they weren't put in place by like explicitly racist people or with racist intent. Do you know what I mean? And so I think helping people, as a white person, I often have tried to reinforce, I know you have positive intent, and now let's get to work. And I think sometimes more of that is necessary than I always realize. And so always grounding the place in a place of trust, like I trust your positive intent. Now let's get to work to dismantle these systems.
I'll add to that, also validate that it's hard to change your built-in habits, right? Pretending that it is easy to change how you interact with people is disingenuous, and it's worth validating the struggle. And
you should be scared of accidentally saying something racist. Do you know what I mean? Because you're afraid of using racial words, and so you call a single student diverse because you don't want to say the wrong words and be hurtful. And that is a good instinct to not want to be hurtful, And so it takes time to learn some of the language and to refine your language so that you are not hurtful. But your intentions to not be hurtful are great.
Yeah, there's a somewhat of a discussion in the chat, Samuel and Ken talking about similar things, right? And I think the point is we can't be so afraid that we don't engage in these conversations, right? And that I think is what we want to make sure. And I think, as Colleen said, we all make mistakes, right? We all will use the incorrect term here or there, right? And we can't be afraid of that. And nobody's going to be fired over, saying the target population, which right now is not the proper term to use, right? And so recognizing that we don't all have it down pat, we don't know, we all make mistakes in this realm, and that as long as you're willing to engage in the conversation and acknowledge those mistakes, figure out how to, what was wrong about it and not do it again is what's important, right? But I do think it is a barrier that departments need to get over, where there's just this fear of saying the wrong thing, and it really blowing up, and if we can't get over that, then the conversations really aren't going to happen.
I'd like to add one more thing, especially if we have some people in leadership here on the call that happen to be white males. I think it's really important to say things to your faculty, to say this, broadening participation in computing is important, because people may project certain views on you just by looking at you that you don't, maybe you really care about BPC. You should say it if you do, so that people know. And that'll also make it so that other people in your faculty know that that's important.
I mentioned I heard a talk recently on how to be an anti-racist by Kendi at Boston University. I'm definitely going to get his book in the near future, but he basically was saying what this conversation is about. And I pulled up my notes. He said that slave traders, Confederates, lynchers, voter suppressors today, all of them self-identify as non-racists, actually. And all of, they refuse to believe that they are racist. And so the heartbeat of that is denial. So what's the opposite of denial? The opposite is confession and acknowledgement, and saying, I am wrong and I want to do better. Help me be better, and being vulnerable in this process. because all of us, at least raised in the United States, likely, we were surrounded by racism, and breaking that is going to take a lot of work. And, and I'm excited so many of us are on the treadmill for that. I know I am. I have a lot to learn and have a pile of books on my nightstand that I wouldn't have thought of reading a year ago. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a process.
And picking up on the Ibram Kendi book recommendation, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and something that's appearing in the chat is that some of the recommendations that we're talking about with respect to race or ethnicity are all applicable to other dimensions of identity, say gender. And one thing that I think Kendi does a really nice job in the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is talk about the ways in which systems of oppression like racism and sexism are intertwined. The ways in which heterosexism is intertwined with sexism, is intertwined with racism. And so these are not separable things in many cases, and we need to keep our eye on the ball in terms of addressing all of them. And to the earlier point, these are not things that are going to go away once we do BPC stuff for 18 months. These are long-term systems that are entrenched in our culture, in our society, in our practices, in our institutions. This is a long-term game to try to create justice.
Colleen is at the BPC dance.
The
BPC dance, let's go!
But it can also be fun. Yeah,
I'm so glad we have that recorded.
If I could just highlight a comment that Amy made in the chat a few minutes ago. She commented that you can pool resources with other departments and so forth to do this, right? Most of the things we've been talking about in the past 10 minutes are not specific to computing. And so it can be work to coordinate with other people, but it can also provide staff power, right? And so she comments particularly for a small school, but I've got a department of 50 faculty and still find it very useful to coordinate with the school and the university to share the load on the wide variety of things that need doing.
And for those of you in engineering departments, several of the other engineering disciplines, well, the engineering directorate at NSF is also starting to require broadening participation type activities. So it's not going to be just computing. I would say from some of the CFPs that I've seen that have been more in the engineering directorate, they're not as far along in thinking about it as computing is, but it's certainly a discussion. And so I would highly recommend, if you're in that position to influence the larger engineering discipline, if your computing is part of engineering, that you start doing some of those things. Doesn't hurt to try and impact more students with activities that are in a lot of cases going to be beneficial to all of those students, not just computing students.
Let me add one thing. We had a task force, I think it was 2 years ago, revamping our freshman, sophomore curriculum. And because we wanted to address some of these, we invited to the task force several people from other colleges and other departments. They had no clue about computing, none whatsoever. But they came in and talked about equity, talking about fairness in testing and all these other issues. And it was fascinating. We paid them, needless to say. It wasn't, bring the Black professors from social justice to do more service work. And it was really rewarding. It was really interesting hearing conversations, hearing things that we agree upon, but that they were giving a theoretical framework to it with a name and literature to back it up, that we're like, yeah, that thing. So I think there is a lot of opportunities to sort of cross those walls between departments in this particular effort.
I have a quick question. So one thing that's come up quite a bit has been interacting with the, I would say, I guess I can be just clear, the Republican part of the state. It's a state institution. It's a place that gets funded a lot. And so trying to do outreach out there has been occasionally difficult. And I'm slightly concerned that diving super deep into this kind of rhetoric will widen that gap. And I'm curious if there are feelings or perspectives or plans to sort of mitigate those, especially at state institutions.
We found it very valuable to make our messaging around accepting all people regardless of background, as opposed to about, we talk about race and gender sometimes, but in some of those areas where people are not as woke, sometimes it's general, whatever your background, we want you to succeed messaging helps people accept that there may indeed be differences in backgrounds that need to be considered.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of sugarcoating things, but we use sometimes low socioeconomic as a proxy for a lot of these, and in North Carolina, that invariably is Black and Latinos. I think you should at some point acknowledge that low socioeconomic overlaps significantly with Black and Latinos, so that people then don't show up at a group and go, why is so many Black people here? You know, and be surprised and avoid the pushback. But we find what Luther said, and using low socioeconomic as the argument. The other one that politicians absolutely love is economic, socioeconomic movement. You know, it's bringing people that start in the bottom tier, and with an education, they can move up to the second tier of socioeconomic. And Charlotte isn't like the bottom of that of big cities in the US. So everybody's gung-ho about computing being an enabler for social movement. And then you use that, so.
That's great.
I think this is a little bit tangential to Curtis's question, but I think building off of that, I think there are ways of getting our colleagues engaged in thinking about benefiting first-generation college students and making college accessible for low-income students in ways where they still are going to be contributing to our BPC goals that relate to race and gender, because some of those practices overlap. But I think it's much easier to understand the mechanisms by which money provides an advantage in American society. Like, people get that. And it's much harder to understand the ways in which racism provides a disadvantage and sexism provide a disadvantage or provide an advantage to men and to white people. And so I think looping people in who are upset about income inequality, I think, is helpful. But Curtis, to your larger point, I do think it is important that in our language on our websites, we are bringing people in rather than turning people away. So I'd rather have someone critique my website for not using woke enough language than for using language that is not accessible and welcoming to people who are new to BPC. So I might not put anti-racist in the first sentence, in the first paragraph. I might not put racism in the first paragraph. So it might be a dance, and we've got a hand from
as one follow-up, I just, in my own dealing with this issue, say for instance, when I'm at recruiting events and speaking to a very broad audience from the public, I will focus on equity concerns and try to get people to just focus in on equality, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. All those things speak across the political spectrum. And then you're arguing that we should be eliminating barriers so that we have more equitable access. The other thing I do is I will cite all the studies that show that diverse teams actually improve the bottom line across companies, and so go the economic angle as well. And then once you've established that, then you can start to talk about other things because you've spoken to a wide spectrum of political beliefs at that point.
You talk money at the last part. No, that's great. I think that idea of speaking to equity concerns is important as well, right? I mean, great things that in America we should all be behind, right? Everybody's going to say, yeah, that's what we should be standing for.
I'll also add, it's important to remember that most things we talk about for equity and inclusion will help everybody, right? And that shouldn't be lost when you're presenting, right? So saying we changed the percentage female or the percentage Black doesn't show that maybe we increased everybody and just increased that more. And so just remembering to show that it's helping everybody can help those people that are worried that you're helping one group by hurting another.
And vote, go vote.
Thanks, Manuel. Yes, important. I don't see any more hands. No more questions in the chat. Well, then I think we can call that an end of that discussion. Heather, do you want to, or Berchin, do you want to take things back?